Good morning, Bryte Church, and welcome to another devotional. I titled today's message, The Heart of Flesh versus the Heart of Stone, and we're continuing working through both the Beatitudes and the Maleditudes. We're going to read three passages again today, Matthew 5:4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 23:14. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense you make long prayers, and therefore you will receive greater condemnation. And Isaiah 23, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of his right? Comes down to this idea of, are we comforting or are we condemning? In the Beatitudes, there is comforting. There is a comforting to those who are in mourning. In the Maleditudes, there is a condemnation, and Isaiah just piles it on. You are not righteous. You take those who mourn. You take those who are suffering and you make the suffering worse. Can you remember a moment in this past week when you saw something where you reacted to it, whether it was at home or at school, maybe even a video that you saw online, and you reacted to it with this feeling of they got what they deserved? Maybe it was somebody who was doing something that was really wrong, beating up on somebody who shouldn't have got, they shouldn't have, somebody who's smaller than them. Maybe it's somebody who cut someone off and then crashed, and you're like, yeah, that's what you get for doing that. Now I want you to think back as well to a moment in your life where you got what you deserved. Was there a moment like that? And I'm sure there was, where you were being mean, where you were being unjust or unrighteous. What did you look like in that moment? How did you act? What motivated you to act in the way that you did, which resulted in you getting what you deserved? Looking back at our actions, we often can see that our glee of retribution for somebody else is kind of balanced out by our grief for the consequences that we endure when we do something wrong. Sin by us or sin against us or sin against someone else is the result of that. There is sin involved in that entire process. Sin of anger, sin of impatience, sin of just not liking someone. There's sin throughout. And when we realize that sin is the driver of evil here on earth, then we can not rejoice over it. We can't rejoice when somebody gets what they deserve because we know that is the direct consequence of sin. We can't rejoice in that moment, and we mourn for that. Sin was involved. Sin caused this tragedy. Sin caused this event. When God says that He will give us a heart of flesh instead of a heart of stone, He's reassuring us that there will come a time when those who pursue Him will become people of God, people who live out the very thing that He wants them to be those individuals who have at their core God's desires and God's passions. Someone who belongs to God, who exemplifies the teachings of Jesus in their own time. Here is a very practical example with the widow's house being taken away, but it doesn't have to be that dramatic. That sin, that injustice, it doesn't have to be so dramatic as taking away the only place for a widow to live. Yet when we live out the Beatitudes, we will have a heart for the mourning. Not just in moments where there's unjust punishment, but when there is just punishment, knowing that it is the result of sin. Sin that we are also subject to and under the rule of while we live in our on earth and live in our mortal bodies. Not that we want to, but that just is the state. We mourn in the iniquities that have separated us from God. We mourn over the mortality in which we boast, like, how great am I? We mourn in the self-righteousness which we've trusted. We sorrow for the rebellion against God and against His will. And in that mourning, we can be very cognizant when we do the things that we do, that we can cause mourning for those around us. As we go into this week, I want to encourage you, be aware of the sin that is at the core of any retribution, at the core of any injustice. That instead of rejoicing with those who are on the right side of justice, we would instead mourn for those who are under the effects of sin, that we might not find ourselves in the same place as them. Amen and God bless.